Hello and welcome to another episode of India and Global Left. If you are new to the show, please hit that subscribe button. Also consider becoming a YouTube member, a Patreon, or donate small amount given in the link in the description box. Without further ado, let me welcome our guest tonight, Professor Mohammad Marandi. Professor Marandi teaches at the University of Tehran. Professor Marandi, welcome back to India and Global Left.
Thank you very much for inviting me. It's always a pleasure.
The world has witnessed the U.S. Israel joint attack on Iran. How would you describe the attack?
It was expected. The Iranians know that the United States government is completely dishonest. Excuse me, completely dishonest. And we saw that before the 12-day war as well. As the Iranians were negotiating with the United States, the U.S. was conspiring, Trump was conspiring with Netanyahu to carry out a blitzkrieg attack. So this time around during the negotiations, before this last round of negotiations, when the U.S. Vice President went out and started behaving like 2003, talking nonsense about Iran moving towards their signs that Iran is developing a nuclear weapon, and Witkoff said that Iran is a week away from assembling a nuclear bomb. When they said that, then I think people were pretty confident. People who I interact with were pretty confident that they were going to attack. And then so when the Omani minister went to Washington and spoke about progress and showed optimism, I think that actually had the reverse effect, and people here were confident that this would lead to a U.S. strike because the powers that have the people that have the real power in the United States, they don't want peace. They are Israeli firsters. They are the Epstein class. They're Zionists. And so when the attack took place, the Iranians, I think, overwhelmingly, from my anecdotal experience and from what I've heard from others, people were not really surprised. And that's why they were really unable to do what they did during the first day of the previous war, where they were able to murder a lot of senior officials and senior academics and scientists, along with their families, of course, and their neighbors, because they would slaughter entire people in entire apartment blocks. So they didn't have that success this time around. Of course, this time it's both the United States and the Israeli regime. Iran's firepower, I think, is quite significant. But what is interesting is that Iranian generals have been saying that we're using old weapons. And from what we're seeing, striking buildings in the Persian Gulf, these are old, very old Iranian drones. None of them are the new generation drones. And the missiles that are being fired at the Israeli regime, they are old missiles built 10, 15, perhaps some of them more than 15 years old. So they're dirt cheap for Iran, but they force the Israelis and the Americans to use up their anti-aircraft missiles, which are very expensive. And that allows the Iranians in future to be able to use their more advanced capabilities. Most of Iranian underground bases have not been used, just like during the previous war, because Iran is planning, obviously, for a long war. The Persian Gulf, the Iranians have not closed yet, but apparently ships are not passing through the Persian Gulf out of fear. Obviously, anyone who knows the Persian Gulf region, they know that it's very easy for the Iranians to block it permanently. And what is even more dangerous for the global economy is if the ships and the tankers and the oil and gas installations are destroyed. Because if they're destroyed, if there is a ceasefire or halt in hostilities in a week's time or in a month's time or in 3 months, it could have a very permanent effect. So the longer this continues, the greater chances there are that the destruction in the Persian Gulf will be permanent. At the moment, ships are not passing through the Strait of Hormuz. They're probably too afraid to, because it's very narrow, and you can hit the ships without using missiles. You can hit them with very light weapons. So as the war continues, this is going to drive the price of oil up. And if Iran decides to shut the Strait of Hormuz, it'll drive the prices even higher. But if the war intensifies, then Iran will have to destroy the ships and the tankers and the oil facilities and the gas facilities. If that happens, then let's say we have a ceasefire a week from now, or a month from now, or 3 months from now, or a halt in hostilities. There will be no oil or gas to go through. There will be no ships to take them. And so the damage that's already going to be done to the global economy and the US economy and the Iranian economy, of course, is significant, but it is going to get much worse. And as I said, if the assets in the Persian Gulf are destroyed, then I think that the damage is going to be so great that it's not something we can really calculate. And these Arab family dictatorships in the Persian Gulf have only themselves to blame. They hosted US bases. They can't have their cake and eat it too. These bases were being used to conspire against Iran until today, and they're still being used against Iran. And sadly, this is the reality of our region. The countries in the Persian Gulf, as well as Turkey, AWACS planes are flying, NATO AWACS planes are gathering intelligence against Iran over Turkish airspace. US bases in Turkey are being used against Iran. In Jordan, the US jets, US defenses and defensive and offensive capabilities are centered. So all these countries are in the US camp, whereas the axis of resistance is on the other side. But the point is that these tiny Arab family dictatorships are too vulnerable to do anything about Iran. And if push comes to shove, these regimes will collapse. And I don't think any of them will really ever recover, because the damage has been done. Dubai will never be Dubai again, for example.
I'll come back to some of the possibilities and implications of Iranian response, but if we could discuss for a bit about the nature and scale of the Israeli-US attack, given the media propaganda in the West about it. Talk about the number of cities or provinces in Iran that have been attacked, and particularly the elementary girls' school in Minab in the southern province of Hormuzgan in Iran.
Yeah, unfortunately, I wrote it down. Yes, until an hour ago, the latest casualty figures for those school children, elementary school girls, was 85 dead. And it's extraordinary. They wiped out the school children, the girls at that school in a small city. It's unbelievable. This is just one example. I mean, they bombed in Fars, in a small city. They bombed a sports club with kids. 15 were killed there. In Tehran, they've been bombing buildings, civilian targets, apartment blocks, and in other cities as well. It's been, they're ruthless. I mean, this is the Epstein class. They have no regard for humanity. We know what they do to girls, the Epstein class. We know what they do, from the Epstein documents. They bomb them too now. The other things that they've done that I don't want to mention on your show, they bombed them as well. This is what we're up against. And so the ruthlessness of the regime in Washington and the Tel Aviv regime and the West, the entire collective West, that they support them. Western media will continue to demonize Iran. Even those who pretend to be opposed to the war, they contribute to the demonization of Iran. Whether, whoever they are. They'll say Iran is evil, but this is a bad policy. Venezuela is evil, but this is but they are the evil ones because they contribute to this narrative. The West is evil. The ruling class in the West is utterly evil. They're strangling the people of Cuba as we speak, women and children. And no one in the Western media cares, whether it's The Guardian or Fox News, whether it's Breitbart or The Independent. Doesn't matter. So the United States is carrying out ruthless attacks, murdering people shamelessly, and the Western media will toe the line. Although opponents of Trump, as this war goes downhill, and I believe it's going to intensify. I think from tonight it's going to intensify the war. But as the war goes downhill for the United States, because they're not going to win this war, the Iranians are steadfast and they're determined. And as Muslims, Shia Muslims in particular, they have a particular steadfastness in opposing oppression, opposing the oppressor, supporting the oppressed, the grandson of the prophet, his martyrdom. People go and research that, they'll better understand where the culture of resistance comes from. Iran is not going to bow down to the United States. And the West, the idiocy, the foolishness of the West is they believe their own propaganda. Iran is about to fall. They've been saying it for decades. I actually did a show on Al Mayadeen that was broadcast yesterday, and I spoke about the never-ending narrative of the collapse of Iran. Since the 1980s, they were saying Iran is about to collapse. Since the 1990s, they were saying the youth have turned against the revolution. All the things that you hear today, the exact same things were said 40 years ago, 30 years ago, 20 years ago. So as the narrative continues, they believe their own propaganda. They hire tens of thousands of Iranians to work in their Persian language media or as terrorists or as tens of thousands. In just one base in Albania, there are literally 4,000 Iranians who are trolls, online trolls. So imagine what sort of money they're finding. They hire these Iranians. The Iranians tell them what they want to hear, and they believe their own propaganda, and they create policy or formulate policy based on that propaganda. And every time they hit a brick wall and they wonder why. But they never change because the narrative is too powerful. So now they think, oh, yes, the Iranian regime, as they love. Whenever you see someone say the Iranian regime, whenever I hear that, I'm suspicious of that person. I don't trust that person. That's someone who's influenced by Western narratives. I mean, I'm sure some of them are good people, but in general, that's so. When they speak about the Iranian regime being evil and unpopular and about to collapse, this is a very old narrative, but it formulates their policies. And in this war, the same thing happened. They thought, they believed their own propaganda that the government gunned down innocent people, all that nonsense. I mean, we don't need to go through this. We discussed it on the last show that Mossad, the CIA were behind this. They themselves admitted this. The former head of the CIA admitted this. The footage, it all shows the violence of these. It was a coup. It was an armed insurrection. It was a semi-coup. And it failed immediately, and people came to the streets in the tens of millions to support the Islamic Republic, both on January the 12th and February the 11th. So, but they don't look at those. No, they don't look at those protests or those demonstrations of support. They just stick to their narratives. They'll say, "Oh, that's just nonsense." So they believe their propaganda. They engage in war, and then they hit a brick wall. So the war will intensify. The United States is going to fail in this war, but then we'll have to see what happens. How things play out. There are people in the United States who hate Iran, the establishment, the Epstein class, but they hate Trump too. So they would like to see Trump fail so that they could hurt Trump. So there are many things at play right now. Inside the United States, it's not as if most of those people in the Democratic Party are decent people. They're the same people who supported and support the genocide in Gaza, except for Thomas Massey and but They see what Trump is doing to the United States. They see what this war is going to do to the United States. They hate Trump. So that may have that the pressure may begin to build on him. But the Iranians are not going to uh, count on internal pressure. They are planning a very long war. And as I said, Iran is using its old missiles. Most overwhelmingly, its underground bases are left untouched. So it's clear that they are planning for a war that may take months.
Donald Trump, in his speech, has called the Iranians to rise up against their own government, following which the New York Times and the Washington Post, the lapdogs of the empire, they ran their own editorials and reports. The New York Times, in fact, I'm not kidding. It ran an editorial titled "Why Did You Attack Iran?" I mean, it kind of criticized Trump, but it says that a U.S. president can justify a war on Iran because of how bad and evil Iran is, and so on and so forth. And
See,
then
I haven't read this. I haven't read this, but I explained how it works.
I'm not kidding. And they put it in bold, Iranian regime. They literally put it in bold, the phrase Iranian regime, and they went on. And the Washington Post basically repeats what Trump said, saying that the mood in Iran is so bad that large number of people are excited about the U.S. Israel attack on Iran. So, just to dispel the propaganda, if you could briefly tell us a little bit about the mood in Iran about the attacks.
No, Iranians are disgusted and outraged, and they're united. And we've had spontaneous demonstrations across Tehran and different cities on my own campus by students in support of the government as we're being bombed. People are coming to the streets. In Mashhad, there's a huge crowd in the city of Mashhad right now on the streets. This is, as I said, the Democratic Party and the Republican Party, they're the same. They're all the Epstein class. They'll watch the demonstrations on the anniversary of the Iranian Revolution on February the 11th. Their reporters will watch it, but it will not change their views. It's Orientalism. It's so deeply embedded in that when they see reality, they still don't comprehend reality. They can see it, but the narrative, their comprehension, their knowledge, it doesn't change. It's still what it used to be. It's still that Orientalist, racist, Eurocentric worldview that dominates. So the BBC reporter came to Tehran, and I know her, during the February the 11th demonstrations. 4 million in Tehran. I was in Moscow at that time. But it just couldn't register for her. So her report from Tehran was completely negative. Why? Because it's not just her, it's the whole BBC. Even if she wants to say a few things, it's not something that's acceptable. If people are supporting the United States, they would take this opportunity to go to the streets and take, I don't know, police stations or whatever it is that the Americans want them to do. Why is no one doing that? People support the state. They've always supported the state. Yes, there's a minority who don't support the state and the Constitution, like in every country, like in India, like in the United States itself. And there are people that the West support that'll carry out violence. The West doesn't have this because no foreign country does that to the United States. The United States does that to Iran. But Iran has, during the previous war that they imposed on the country, people rallied. The Israeli regime had to beg for a ceasefire. Right now, you have a combined force of the United States and the Israeli regime to defeat the Iranian people, with the help of regional states, as I explained earlier. So why can't they succeed? It's because They believe their own propaganda, and their own propaganda is a part of that reservoir of knowledge that has accumulated for decades and centuries. I told you, if your viewers go and watch my program on Al Mayadeen, which was broadcast yesterday, they'll see the same things that are being said about Iran today were being said 40 years ago, 35 years ago, 30 years ago, 25 years ago. People are tired of the regime. The youth dislike it. There's another revolution brewing. All the things that you see now, you saw in the 1980s, the 1990s, and so on. Nothing has changed. And it's basically because they cannot see the world in any way except for the way in which they see it today. Trump is more crude, but in essence, his Eurocentric worldview is really not all that different from that of the rest of the political establishment, the Epstein class in the United States or across Europe and Australia and New Zealand and Canada and so on.
I wanted to come to briefly to Iranian response to the attack, given the Western media outlets have always minimized Iranian capabilities and real responses. I mean, partly it is lies, deception, but partly it's also misunderstanding about Iran's capabilities. We have seen Iran responding immediately this time, even much quicker than what was the case in June and before. And there are reports about the attack in the U.S. Fifth Fleet in Bahrain, destruction of a sophisticated FP-132 radar system in Qatar, and Haaretz has written about near relentless barrages of Iranian drones and missile attacks in Israel. If you could briefly tell us about the Iranian response so far we have seen today.
Well, the Iranian response, as you said, has been quite devastating, but Iran is not hitting hard. As I said, the Iranians are warming up. They're using old weapons. They're trying to probe the enemy. They're trying to deplete their surface-to-air capabilities. And then they will get they'll start using more sophisticated and their newer technology. I think, though, from tonight, it's going to get more devastating. The Americans will brutalize Iranians as much as possible in the coming hours, but Iran will hit back very hard. And at the end of the day, Iran has the upper hand because its people are fighting an existential war. They have to win. The United States is winning a war of choice for the sake of a genocidal regime, to support a genocide, to support the Epstein class, at a time when the world is turning against the Israeli regime and Americans are turning against the Israeli regime. Look at the polls that have been carried out for the first time in the United States, which is the most propagandized nation in the world. More people support Palestine than the Israeli regime. This is huge. So for Iran, this is a fight for their survival, and they've been preparing themselves for a very long time with all these underground bases and drone capabilities. And the Persian Gulf is extremely vulnerable. It is probably the most vulnerable place and sensitive place in the world because 20 to 25% of the global energy comes from this area. 20% in the Persian Gulf, and let's say 25% the Caucasus and West Asia together. So if the United States pushes too hard, it could blow up in their face. It already is. And this is going to have economic already the price of oil has gone up and it's going to go up further, but it will get worse. So Iran knows its advantages. As I said, it has been planning for this since the United States invaded Iraq. So Iran's missile capabilities against Israel, that's a small portion of Iran's capabilities. Iran's medium range and short range missiles and drones and its speedboats and its underwater drones and its torpedoes and its mini submarines, and Iran has built all sorts of capabilities for asymmetrical warfare. And the Americans are pushing the world towards a very dangerous place.
And on the Iranian pushback or retaliation against the GCC countries, do you think it will be limited to the U.S. Bases and military assets, or would it be all out against these ally countries as well?
Well, the Iranians have already said anything that is
There are no red lines, was one of the official statements.
anything that can be considered a U.S. asset. How do you define that? And if the war becomes more intense, and these countries, they're a part of this aggression against Iran. They cannot pretend that they're innocent. The United States is carrying out these attacks through the help that these countries have been giving the United States for many years. And in the case of Qatar, for example, Qatar pays for the US base. Not only does it give them that place, it pays for their expenses. So when they murder Iranians, when they destroy Iranian assets, they can't expect Iran to say, okay, we will leave you alone because it's US bases. We'll have to see how things play out in the days ahead. But if I were living in the Persian Gulf region, I would leave immediately. If there are no flights, I'd drive across Saudi Arabia and just find a way to leave.
What kind of support would Iran look for from Russia and China? Last question.
Okay, sorry. Well, Iran is fighting its own fight. But obviously, Iran's relationship with Russia and China are very good. And the Russians and the Chinese see the United States as a threat. They see the US president as erratic. And the United States as increasingly unpredictable. A dying empire that is lashing out. So obviously, they have a vested interest in supporting Iran, and the relationship is close. Also, Iran's allies across the region are preparing for war. So, a scenario where the Americans win at all.
We'll leave it there, Professor Marandi. Thank you so much for joining, and stay safe.
Thank you for having me, and I hope you stay safe too.
Hi, my name is Ayushman. I, along with Jyotisman, have started this platform. In the last 2 years, we have tried to build content for the left and progressive forces. We have interviewed economists, historians, political commentators, and activists so far. If you have liked our content so far and want us to build an archive for the left, I have two requests for you. Please do consider donating for the cause. Link is in the description below. Also, if you are not able to do so, don't feel sad. You can always like our videos and share our videos to your comrades. Finally, don't forget to hit the subscribe button.